Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Village Board of Trustees meeting. It is November 5th, 2012, and if we could all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. If our clerk could please call the roll.
Trustee Glasgow. Trustee Hayes.
Here.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Here.
Trustee Scaletta. Trustee Sidor.
Here.
Trustee Blackwood. Here. Trustee Breyer.
Here.
Trustee Farwell.
Here.
President Mulder.
Here. We have a quorum, so we'll continue with our agenda. For those of you who are joining us this evening, there should be copies of our agenda at the back of the room. And if you'd like to address the village board under citizens to be heard, we please ask that you complete one of the blue cards and bring it up to the clerk, who will get it up to us. With that, we go to item 4, approval of minutes. First, we have the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held October 8th, 2012. I'd ask if there are any comments, corrections, deletions, or additions.
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Trustee Farwell, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. Any other comments? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item B, approval of minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting held October 15th, 2012. Again, comments, corrections, deletions, or additions?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Blackwood, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Third, we have minutes of the Board of Trustees meeting of that same evening, October 15th, 2012. Again, comments, corrections, deletions, or additions?
Move approval. Second.
Motion by Trustee Hayes, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And finally, the minutes of our Committee of the Whole meeting held October 22nd, 2012. Again, comments, corrections, deletions, or additions?
Move approval.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Farwell, seconded by Trustee Blackwood.
Pass.
Note the pass for Trustee Rosenberg. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We now move to item 5, approval of accounts payable dated October 30th. I'd call on Trustee Hayes.
Thank you, Madam President. I would move approval of the payables dated October 30th, 2012 in the amount of $2,081,950.40.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Hayes, seconded by Trustee Farwell. Any comments, corrections? Anyone from staff? No? Roll call, please.
Trustee Hayes.
Yes.
Trustee Farwell.
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood. Yes. Trustee Breyer.
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Yes.
Trustee Sidor.
Yes.
President Mulder.
Yes. Motion carries. No recognitions this evening. Public hearings, citizens to be heard. We have 2 that are items on the agenda. I think all 3 of them are for housing. So we'll take that up when we get to housing. We have a motion and a report coming up very shortly. So we'll call on you. Anyone on an item that is not on the agenda? Seeing none. We'll move on from citizens to be heard. Old business. We have a report of the Committee of the Whole meeting of this evening, where we interviewed 3 residents for appointments to commissions. And we had our first motion coming from Trustee Hayes.
Thank you, Madam President. I would move at this time, as I did earlier this evening, the appointment of Mark Klein to the Citizens with Disabilities Commission for a term ending April 30th, 2015.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Hayes, seconded by Trustee Farwell. Any additional comments? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Next motion is also Trustee Hayes.
And I would move at this time, as I did earlier this evening, the appointment of David DeVito to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a term ending April 30th, 2017.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Hayes, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. Any additional comments? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. And our third motion made by Trustee Blackwood.
I would move currently, as I did earlier in the evening, to concur with your recommendation to appoint Matthew Ottaviano to the Special Events Commission with the term ending April 16th of the year 2016.
Second.
Motion by Trustee Blackwood, seconded by Trustee Sidor. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Would our three appointees please approach the microphone? Welcome, gentlemen. I think if you all speak somewhat loudly, the mic will pick you up. Yeah, that's great, Matt. I'm going to try to do this in unison as much as we can, except for the exception. We didn't have a rehearsal, so the audience be patient with us, okay? If you please all raise your right hand. Would you clearly say aye and state your name? We'll start with Matt, Dave, and Mark. Matt?
I, Matthew Ottaviano.
I, David DeVito.
I, Mark Klein.
And then in unison, repeat, having been appointed to the office of
Having been appointed to the office of
Matt,
Special Events Commission.
Zoning Board of Appeals.
Commission for the Disabled.
and in unison, in the village of Arlington Heights,
In the village of Arlington Heights.
in the county of Cook,
In the county of Cook.
do solemnly swear and affirm
Do
solemnly swear and affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that
I will support the Constitution of the United States.
and the Constitution of the State of Illinois,
The Constitution of the State of Illinois.
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
And I will faithfully discharge the duties
of this office
of this office
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my abilities.
Gentlemen, you were terrific. No practice or anything. Congratulations, and if you'd please all come forward, I will make certain that I give you the right paper with the right name. Mark, David, and Matthew. And on behalf of the trustees and staff of the village, you are now an extension of the village board, and we ask that you wear our logo pin as we do, because you are an extension of this village board, and I want to be the first to congratulate you. Thank you, Matt, David, Mark. Thank you very much. Join us in thanking these individuals. They're signing their oaths, which our clerks are good. 50 years ago, we have files of those who got sworn in to serve on our boards and commissions. Those pieces of paper never go away. So I don't know what technology is doing now. But as the gentlemen sign in front of the clerk, who will then authorize their signatures, we thank all the approximately 180 residents who serve on more than 18 or 20 different boards and commissions that advise this village board and our village staff and work through. Everyone knows about the zoning board and the plan commission, but we have the citizens with disabilities. We have special events. We have numerous Board of Local Improvements. Some meet regularly, some meet when they need to meet, but they are a great asset, and it allows, I think, a government to be able to realize that they get input from the people who live here, the people we serve. So it's a great mechanism, and many of our sitting trustees served on boards and commissions prior to running for office and being part of this board. Some of them for a number of years, I think almost all of you. So I want to thank these three new appointees and all the other members that serve on the many, many commissions. So we now move back to our agenda, as that concludes the committee of the whole meeting of this evening report of our actions, and we go to item B, report of the Housing Commission that met on October 30th, and I'm going to call on Mr. Dixon.
Thank you, Mayor, board members. You'll remember that on June 11th of this year, at a committee of the whole meeting, the board received a briefing from CMAP regarding the housing or homes for a changing region study. There was interaction among the board members and the CMAP representatives to a limited extent because of time allocation that evening. About a week later, on a Tuesday night, I believe it was the 19th of June, there was a public meeting on the same subject where input was received and a visioning process took place. That was recorded in terms of being retained and analyzed for incorporation into the report that is still a draft and unfolding. We notified for tonight's meeting those persons from the public who attended the meeting back on June 19. We let them know that this would be on this evening. A bit to our surprise, last Tuesday night at a meeting of the Housing Commission, the Commission adopted a motion that stated on the agenda recommending that the board adopt the draft recommendations as an outline of reasonable objectives for achieving and maintaining attainable housing in the village. Although the Commission made this recommendation, it's our belief that no motion or official action is required of the village board tonight. We would ask that you, as will members of the public, I suspect, offer some comments after the presentation by the CMAP representatives. We've asked them to limit that to about 10 minutes, them being CMAP. And then the work will continue on this report and what is now draft plan. The final plan will be presented to the village board at a future date. So tonight is another interim status report from CMAP on the progress they've made since June. And Mayor, I'll turn it back to you, and I think it's time for you to call on them.
Representatives of CMAP, if you can come forward and identify yourself. And just for those who are in the audience, CMAP stands for Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. I need to acknowledge King Harris, who is part of, we call the power thinking tanks from the city of Chicago and representing the Chicago region. But King has been, for my whole 20 years serving as the village president of Arlington Heights, has always been there on the cutting edge of new and innovative ways to create housing and to assess the region and making certain that we have all types of housing to meet the varying needs, which in itself is challenging. But it's nice to have a regional agency to sort of set some goals and some ideals, and then each community is left to decide how it can fit into that agreement. So welcome, and if you can give your name, I don't think we need your address, just your name and association with CMAP.
Absolutely. Thank you for the introduction, Mayor. My name is Jonathan Birch. I'm an associate planner with CMAP, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. And as the mayor alluded to, we're also joined tonight by representatives from some of our partner organizations and partners of the village in this. And there is the King Harris from the Metropolitan Planning Council, Allison Mill-Clement from the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus, and Mary Lou Sidel from the Northwest Suburban Housing Collaborative.
All three of you wave so we know where you are. Okay.
So as Bill referenced a moment ago, we've been here previously to talk to this body along with the village and representatives of the public as well about the homes process as we've moved through it thus far. We're in the process of working on that housing plan. It's also a plan that's working through the Northwest Suburban Housing Collaborative, of which you can see there's 5 members, including Arlington Heights and some of your neighbors such as Buffalo Grove, Mount Prospect, Palatine, and Rolling Meadows. And we're really at a key point in the process right now. If you see up there, you can see items 1 through 6. We're sort of on item number 4, which is the municipal recommendations stage. We've worked through the previous stages, including the sub-regional recommendations. We had a meeting here in the village, which you were kind enough to hold on August 24th to talk about sub-regional recommendations with the mayor, mayors and elected officials from a number of the collaborative communities and get the feedback of elected officials and staff on those thoughts. And then also now we've been in the stage of drafting municipal recommendations, which includes the draft recommendations memo that you should have received as part of your packet tonight, and that's what I'm going to provide an overview for. And really we're at a critical stage in the process. We don't want to move forward any further until we get feedback from you to see if we're going down the right road, because these are draft recommendations. We don't want to spend time putting together a plan that's not going to reflect the things that you want it to reflect. So with that in mind, I'll go into the draft recommendations. The first one talks about downtown Arlington Heights. You guys have spent a lot of time in the past 20 years focusing on redeveloping the area in downtown Arlington Heights and thinking about ways to attract businesses and residences, arts and entertainment facilities, all those sorts of things to the area. Obviously, a housing plan wouldn't be complete if it didn't reference all the activity that's going on there and the opportunities that still exist in that area. So our first recommendation is to continue those redevelopment efforts and to use the data and information that's included in the Homes Report as a guide for providing a mix of owner and rental housing for multiple age groups and multiple income levels within the downtown Arlington Heights area. The second recommendation talks about opportunities for new housing. And this is designed to build off the information that's already in your comprehensive plan that talks about providing a wide spectrum of diverse housing stock here for the village. And this simply takes that another step and references the information that would be included within the Homes Report. It includes information about ages and incomes of people who may be living here in the village in the future, in 2040, and the sorts of people in terms of owners and renters in different types of housing. And when we've looked at that data, it shows that there's a spectrum across the board of people who want to move here into Arlington Heights. And as the village considers if and how to grow, this gives you all information about how you can choose to do that. And that as you explore opportunities for new housing, if you consider to grow and consider how you might grow between now and 2040, to use this information to consider providing a mix of owner and rental units, single-family homes, multifamily buildings for a variety of income levels, because there's projected demand from households who make below $15,000 a year to households who make above $150,000 a year. So if you're providing a complete housing market, you're serving everyone, not only at the low, not only at the high. The third recommendation focuses on condominium foreclosures. Unlike the previous two recommendations, which are more general in nature and talk about how the village may change over 10, 20, 30 years, this is focused on a sort of a short-term housing issue. And the thinking is that as a mix of recommendations, we try and help you address short-term pressing issues, things that have come up as we've talked to representatives of the village and representatives within the region, and also to address those sort of longer-term issues. So the first recommendation here talks about condominium foreclosures and mapping and monitoring those over time. Specifically, the village does receive already notices about when a foreclosure process starts within the Cook County courts and when it ends, and consider using that information to expand your knowledge of where foreclosures might be occurring locally, whether they're going all the way through to the REO process, in other words, someone's bank's owning it or an investor's buying it, or maybe a step back from there, just someone who's a household who's going into the foreclosure process and then coming back due on their mortgage and going in and out, and what that might mean in terms of a sign where there may be a household who's in need or in trouble, and ways you might target services towards that area to head that off before it becomes a larger issue. But the goal is to think about using this data source and consider using it to expand your knowledge of where foreclosures are occurring here and how that may change over time. The next four recommendations build off of your existing efforts. Obviously, the village already registers its condominium association, so it gets information about sort of who's in charge of the condominium association, so you know who to contact, and if the village needs to contact someone who's a representative of it. And these recommendations are designed to focus on relationship building, to take that existing body of information, to take those existing relationships and use that to address any issues that may exist in any existing condominium developments or townhome developments before they would get to a more troubled property stage. And so the first one is monitoring foreclosures within those buildings. The second is discussing data trends, inherent concerns, and issues. So in other words, using that registration process to get feedback, to build a relationship with those condominium board members so that they would inform the village of when they're having issues before it becomes a village-wide issue or a larger issue that would need to be addressed. So those can be headed off before they become larger in nature. The third one is to think about developing benchmarks for troubled properties. So if there are properties maybe where you haven't received that sort of heads up, the village has some sort of independent, separate way of determining when it may think a property is in trouble or may need some assistance or may need some attention given to it. And those could be a variety of things. It could be the number of foreclosures, it could be the number of rentals, it could be number of utility shutoffs. There's a whole variety of measures. Those are just examples. But thinking about ways in which you could consider what those benchmarks may be, and then finally taking those benchmarks, the final step, which is working with the Northwest Suburban Housing Collaborative to think about developing intervention strategies. So that's not necessarily saying that you have to come up with new strategies on your own, but thinking about if there is a troubled property or a condominium association and they're having issues, maybe Buffalo Grove has gone through the same issues before already, and thinking about, well, if they've gone through similar issues and maybe have some solutions, using the collaborative as a way to sort of brainstorm about those ideas, to encourage that flow of information between communities that may have already tackled some of these problems. The next set of recommendations focus on your rental licensing program. The village has a really high quality rental licensing program right now, and these are designed to just tweak around the edges, to think about ways to make sure that it's flexible and ready if you see changes in the future, particularly in response to perhaps the foreclosures or increasing rentals amongst units that may stem from that. So the first recommendation is to evaluate whether or not it makes sense here in Arlington Heights to license all rental units that are within multifamily buildings. Currently, that's not the case, but there is a possibility that as you see increasing foreclosures in condominium buildings, that those may become rental units. And as your rental stock may increase in that area, it may make sense to expand your rental licensing program. So that's our first recommendation, is to evaluate whether or not that makes sense here in Arlington Heights. The second component of this recommendation is to monitor foreclosures and monitor rentals in single-family homes and in duplexes. Right now, those are not licensed, and we're not recommending that the village outright consider licensing them. Instead, we're simply saying that the village should continue to stay on top of it. The Code Enforcement Department does a good job of that right now, and we want to make sure and heighten and emphasize that it makes sense to continue doing that, so that if the village did see changes in the future, that it would be ready to go to make changes as it would be necessary at a later date. The third recommendation is to evaluate a landlord education program. Many communities have found landlord education to be a valuable part of its rental licensing program and its relationship building with existing landlords, both building and strengthening relationships in terms of trust between the village and its landlords, but also at the same time increasing compliance with its codes. So our recommendation here is to evaluate whether or not that makes sense, and if it did make sense, to consider operating one with other collaborative members. Obviously, some of the other collaborative members already do operate rental license or landlord education programs, whether those be stuff like crime-free housing or variants thereof. Our recommendation is that if it makes sense for you to go down that road, then you should also explore collaborating with your neighbors to get the most out of the staff time and the funds that would go towards operating such a program, so that you don't have to do it on your own, that you can share that burden with your neighbors as well. The final recommendation is to consider consistent data gathering as you operate your rental licensing program. One of the real opportunities here is that if many of the collaborative entities also operate rental licensing programs and collect data in the same way and collect the same types of data, then you can pool that and consider regional solutions, so that if you have a problem landlord here in Arlington Heights, and let's say the same problem landlord is operating, or problem property management firm is operating in Palatine, then because you're operating the data as a whole, because you can see it as a whole, because it's consistent, you can think about whether or not it makes sense for the collaborative through multiple municipalities to try and address that code enforcement issue, to try and work with that property owner, to work with that landlord, rather than to do it simply on a one-off basis. The next two recommendations are sort of inherently linked. The first one is to continue your rehab program. Obviously, we're aware that as part of your CDBG funds and some other funding sources you've sought out, you've operated in the past both an owner-occupied rehabilitation program along with a rental rehabilitation program. Our recommendation is to continue both of those, obviously depending on funding source and funding levels, and that as funds are available, to consider two specific focuses. One would be on owner-occupied senior housing because of the expected increase in the number of seniors living here in the village between now and 2040, and thinking about opportunities and ways to encourage people to be able to age in place in their homes. The second is to think about rental rehabilitation, particularly for low-income households, to think about how you would go about preserving and maintaining a quality rental housing stock occupied by people of lower income currently and in the future. And the other component that we want to talk about there is exploring funding sources. Obviously, I mentioned before that rental rehabilitation, which is something that you'd engaged in the past, is something that tends to depend in part on funding sources. Those have been decreasing in recent years as federal funding sources have decreased. So our recommendation is that you explore other funding sources for housing programs and to explore those options. And if they make sense, consider moving down the road with them. One example would be the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which I know you guys are currently exploring. Another example would be the Cook County Home Investment Partnership Program, or HOME program, which is operated through the Cook County Consortium. That's a federal funding source that helps provide money for a variety of housing projects. And our recommendation is that you consider those specific opportunities and whether or not those funding sources make sense. They would be good examples of things that could fund an expanded rehab program, but could fund other things as well. The next two recommendations, the first one focuses on maintaining housing supply. One of the things when we look out towards 2040 and consider if and how the village may grow, there is, as I said before, demand for people of all income levels, from below $15,000 a year to above $150,000 a year, who may want to live here in the village in a year like 2040. So our recommendation is that as the village considers how to grow, one of the ways to deal with or to accommodate lower income households is to work and maintain your existing supply of units that houses those individuals, people at that price point already. There are such units already in Arlington Heights. Those are the sorts of units that are sometimes vulnerable to change over time. So our recommendation is to work and consider ways to maintain those units going forward in the future. The next recommendation focuses on sustainability and affordability. There's many components of housing costs. So if you're an owner, it can include things like your mortgage, or it can include property insurance. If you're a renter, it can include rent or your renter's insurance, all those sorts of things. One of the common ways is to think about utility costs. So and that's a key component of being able to afford a housing unit. If you can't pay your water bill, if you can't pay your electric bill, then you really can't afford the unit. So one of the recommendations here is that the village work to identify sustainable, energy efficient funding sources to help address housing affordability, and by identifying those funding sources to work on implementing them for both owners and renters here in the village once those funding sources have been found. Obviously, we know that the village has in the past operated some energy efficiency programs. We know that's also been part of the village's existing homeowner rehab program. This is something that certainly can build on top of those existing efforts, doubling down on some things the village has already done. The final recommendation focuses on the sub-regional partnerships along Algonquin Road. While we understand that Arlington Heights has different issues along Algonquin Road than does its neighbors in Mount Prospect and Rolling Meadows, we also know that there are common possibilities out there as well, common issues and overlaps within that area. So our recommendation is that as you consider that area over time, as you consider how it may change, that you focus on where those opportunities for collaboration may exist and explore them. So those could include things like supporting infrastructure improvements, transportation improvements along I-90, which parallels Algonquin Road in that area and is inherently tied to how Algonquin Road works and functions as a place, is its proximity to I-90. So if there's changes that occur in that area, that you could be mutually supportive in terms of pursuing those transportation improvements. Another example would be considering opportunities for development or redevelopment. Obviously, over time, areas may change. There may be renovation, there may be redevelopment, there may be new businesses moving in, businesses moving out, people moving in, people moving out. But if you consider opportunities for renovation or redevelopment over time within that corridor, to explore opportunities where there may be shared overlaps in terms of what could be achieved within the corridor as a whole, including opportunities along mutual borders. The final example would be shared social services. Obviously, we know all three communities have in the past and continue to, in various forms, provide services to residents living in that area. In some cases, those services may overlap. In some cases, they may not, because of the different needs of people in each community. But where those services overlap, we think that the village should explore working with its neighbors and identify where those opportunities, where those overlaps may exist, and then explore whether or not there's opportunity for shared social service provision within the area as well. So those are the draft recommendations that we've put together. They are general in nature. We're trying to give you sort of a quick overview. There's a little bit more depth that was provided in the memo, but at this stage, that's the presentation we have. We're interested in getting your feedback in terms of what you liked, what you didn't like, areas you think we should go in more depth, areas you think we should cut back, all those sorts of things. So, thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. And Jonathan, you've given us a very comprehensive part of the outline and I know we have 3 residents that I believe attended the workshop. I know a couple of them that are here in the audience have asked to make comments, and Mr. Dixon, would it be appropriate to have the residents speak first?
I think that'd be fine.
Before we turn to the board, unless someone's, okay. Cal, why don't we start with you? If you could clearly give your name and address for the record, and then we put this little 3-minute sort of time frame on. I don't know if they're going to work it, but so.
Right. My
Welcome.
name's Cal Burnton. I live at 416 South Belmont here in Arlington Heights. Thank you, President Mulder and members of the board. I've lived in Arlington Heights for almost 30 years. I live 2 blocks east of Arlington Heights Road in the Scarsdale subdivision. I'm here to speak about the draft recommendations because as I read them, they're long on generality and they're really short on specificity. And for that reason, it's really hard to get a feel for whether there's something that we would want you to vote for or not. I attended the June 19th meeting. In particular, we were concerned about, there was talk about how you're going to develop between Sigwalt and Park Street on Arlington Heights Road. At that time, we broke into groups, and there was an agenda. They talked about high rises, low rises, different types of rentals. And the sentiment, at least in that area, and largely for in terms of developments for the entire village, was people were against it. They had concerns about traffic, the effect of a subdivision of rentals on the school systems, crime, property values, the tax base. People had concerns all around. And so I think the goals that were addressed here largely were opposed by the residents. The Homeowners Association was ones that encouraged us to attend the meeting. They're not here tonight, I don't believe. But the goals were not shared when you get down to specific areas. And the problem that I have with some of the recommendations that are put forth is they are very general, but when you get down to details, where exactly are you talking about doing this? They told us back in June that they don't have any specific recommendations. They're not going to have subsidized housing in any particular area. But now when I read the report, they're talking about $15,000 rentals for rental values, $35,000. they're using numbers, but there's no specificity on where this is going to be. So my position is that while I don't believe that the goals are shared by the residents when you get down to specific areas. So the question is not so much do you believe in the goals generally, but specifically where are you talking? And when you get down to the specifics, what parts of Arlington Heights are you talking about and what exactly is being proposed? And until you get the detail, I would ask that you not accept the recommendations, which are too general and not specific enough for us to have any meaning. Thank you.
You got 25 seconds left, Cal. Kim Dyer. Hi, Kim.
Arlene. Kim Dyer. I live at 425 South Pine. I too have lived here for 28 years. I live a block in from Arlington Heights Road, a block north of Park and south of Sigwalt. And when we came to the meeting this past summer, a lot of the discussion talked about developing that specific area. And to echo what Cal said, if the Housing Commission met last week, first of all, we were told that we'd be updated upon these meetings. We were never told about that. So if they were meeting about this and it was an open meeting, those of us who attended that meeting should have been invited to come so we could hear more specifics. So I would like to hear more specifics. I would also like to address my concern about already our residents talk about paying high taxes. I know that many people pay between $10,000 and $20,000 a year in real estate taxes. And whenever you put in affordable housing, the cost of those residents living in your community is the same whether they're paying the high income tax that many of us are paying on our properties or not. So if we spend about $10,000 a year educating a student in District 25, if we get more students in this affordable kind of housing, that people aren't paying that kind of income taxes in, somebody somewhere is going to have to pick up the extra cost of those students. And in fact, many times students who come from areas of more affordable housing are students who have been moved more often or come from homes where English is a second language, all of which means they're wonderful young people, but they cost a lot more to educate because they're not on the same level as the average student that we get in District 25. So many times those students will cost more and we'd be bringing in less, which means somewhere along the way, those people paying property taxes are going to have to pay more to make up the cost. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim, and thank you for your involvement in membership on our youth commission. So I think that's where I've got you now. Okay. Thomas Bentley.
Hello, my name is Thomas Bentley. I live at 742 South Bristol. Pardon me. I didn't have time to prepare any remarks because I just heard about this meeting tonight, and I was here at this meeting that was this past summer. And I put my email down there because I wanted to find out, you know, when you're having these meetings too, and I didn't, so I found out the hard way. But anyway, first I'd like to say I love the fact that I love Arlington Heights, and the Pledge of Allegiance starts the meeting. I mean, I love you guys for that. So that aside, you know, we always wanted to live in Arlington Heights, but we couldn't afford it. And then we lived at 30-something Ashland, and then we could afford it, and we moved here. And I like it here a lot. And the village in regarding to the low-income housing, I also would like to see some specificity because it's really pretty vague. And I think I speak for a few people that like to see just exactly what what you guys have planned or what the CMA has planned. And if the village is intending to mandate these this low-income housing, it should come from a mandate from the masses, from the voters. I think it would be wouldn't be out of line to put this on a ballot. What if when we see some specifics about this, and I just wrote down a couple of notes because as the young gentleman was talking about the funding for affordable housing in the the environment we have now. It's a worst economic downturn we've had since the Great Depression. But that aside, one of the things that struck me was the seniors, and the affordability for seniors to live here and to continue to live here. Well, right now I'm paying $17,000 a year in taxes. So in 10 years, what do you think that's going to be? Are you going to be able to help me then too? Because I want to stay here my whole life. I like it here a lot. But my taxes each year, each triennially, go up approximately between like 38 and 42%. So basically, 12, 13, 14% a year. At that rate, I won't be able to live here either. And there has to come some kind of balance. I don't want to ramble here. My point is that, yeah, I'd like to live here too for my whole life, but I don't think at the current rate of expansion of the taxes I'd be able to. And if we institute some more load for the taxpayers to bear, the taxes are only going to go up even further and make it less affordable for a lot of the homeowners who live here now. So that's all I have to say, and I hope you guys look at this very seriously before voting on anything. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else in the audience wish to make a comment on this subject? These were the three that signed up, and I really truly thank you for coming, because I think there was some misinformation, and I think there's not specificity as to locations at this point. And I think all three of you come from a very established, one of the oldest sections of the village of Arlington Heights. And many of the homes were small when they were initially built, but the additions and so forth have been added on. That's how we get to the $17,000 property tax. The schools are excellent, but they're not free. And I think that's a point that you're trying to make as well. And so this citizen input is important. And so I look to our housing, and this is a regional approach. We're trying not to have each community reinvent something, but it's shared knowledge, and when we work together, and that's why the 5 communities have been put together, and it's a matter of tasteful housing in all the different levels, because when young college people come, they want something that they can't afford, a single-family house. They want an apartment. So it's not just low-income housing. That term was used. I think it's everything from A to Z. And I see my CMAP shaking his head. Okay, I got it. I've been to a lot of meetings. So I know our Housing Commission has dealt with looking at this, and most of our rehab and money that was referred to in the presentation or dollars that came through from the federal government, and they are designated to be spent in those areas. And so that's what was part of that report as well. I don't know if anybody on staff, nor if anybody else wants to add anything. Trustees, our former Housing Commission member, Trustee Farwell.
Thank you, Mayor. John, thank you very much for your presentation. I do appreciate it. I was on the Housing Commission for a number of years before coming here as trustee and running as trustee, so I know a little bit of a history of some of our story behind what you're recommending. Some of it has been there, done that, while other parts are, that's a good idea, or maybe we could do something along that lines. When we're looking at increasing affordability, especially in the downtown area, as well as any new development, but bulk of our new development in the last 15 years has been downtown. We've had the density bonus housing proposal, which has already been utilized by developers in the past. So, I think that was kind of, for lack of a better term, kind of cutting edge on our side. And it was interesting to see how we were able to help promote private development of quality stock housing. And it actually kind of created what we were calling in the Housing Commission stealth affordable housing, where it was affordable housing, but, you know, it wasn't just a given building or a given area. People never would know. It's out there right now. They don't even know where it is. It's because of the way it has been funded, and it's been funded with private dollars with public incentive. When I say public, in other words, the administration's incentive. So we've always been trying to think outside the box that way in Arlington Heights when it comes to affordable housing. Some of the issues, some of the ideas that you had in here were interesting, that I think might be doable, as far as education of the landlord educational program. I know Palatine already has one, so maybe we can partner up with Palatine, certainly not as in a mandatory level with respect to our landlords, but we could certainly talk with Palatine and maybe have a joint meeting for landlords. We could look at our crime-free housing ordinance to see whether or not we should be addressing something like that. I know there are other municipalities that have it. Mount Prospect has it, Bensenville has it, Chicago Ridge has it, where it makes it easier for the landlord to act more swiftly upon units who are that's being occupied by offenders of the law. And that way it actually helps promote a safe environment no matter where you are. That doesn't necessarily have to be just affordable, but unfortunately sometimes those go hand in hand. So maybe that's something that we could do as well. Intervention strategies with foreclosure, I think we kind of have to be worried, we have to pay a little bit of attention on duplication of services. We are but a local municipality, as is Palatine, Mount Prospect, you know, all our partners. Cook County has, in the foreclosure courts, the first round is the initial mediation round, and many people who decide to attend that have the possibility of going into a modification mediation. So it might be interesting to see what Cook County does in detail, so that we are not duplicating it. But maybe what you might be suggesting is maybe heading that off at the pass. I'm not exactly sure based on this, where we're going before they even get to that point. I'm not too sure. And in reading it and in reading your other material, I wasn't too sure at what point are you guys pinpointing. I think the Cal who spoke before, it's true. I'm not too sure. These were so broad and nebulous that it was, I wouldn't be able to say, oh, this is a definite, you know, let's go ahead and recommend all these, because I'm not even too sure what we're recommending, and I'm not too sure what type of responsibilities and liabilities we would be passing on to our citizens by passing. So I think we're right in that we have to really flush out exactly what these recommendations are you're seeking for us to adopt. Some of them I could see have some merit. Others I do have some questions with, only because of duplicity of services. Had a question for you though.
Sure.
What would you do with, or what would you suggest somebody do with the foreclosure tracking that you're referring to?
So that information could be used as part of a regional system through the collaborative to get an idea on where perhaps social services could be intervened. Obviously, as you mentioned, the Cook County foreclosure process itself, obviously you don't want to be duplicative of that, but if, for example, let's say you were funding a Sidor or some other housing agency that may already be providing those services, or let's say that the Northwest Suburban Housing Collaborative was helping to provide those sorts of foreclosure mediation services or those sorts of things, that it could be another way for the village to provide another overlay on top of that to help make sure that homeowners who are going through that process are being well served in the area, and figuring out what areas geographically within Arlington Heights make the most sense, and if that were to change over time, how to do so.
Because I think the market already understands that the people that are in trouble, or the areas that might be concentrated with more people possibly being in that marginal section of possibly pre-foreclosure area, are probably the condominium conversions that happened right before the fall. Those are really, that's the way the industry's reading it, and I think the industry's right. So instead of tracking, maybe we could already say, all right, well, those are the areas that maybe we should be a little bit concerned with. Maybe we could offer some free seminars to the existing homeowners that are in pre-foreclosure among our municipalities. I mean, I think that's something that we could do.
Okay.
There's some real meat there. Instead of this tracking, it's okay, that's great, it's a verb, now what I'm going to do with it. You know, have some real action to it. Let's, you know, information seminars to help people, to point homeowners in our communities that are finding themselves in trouble, point them in the right direction to increase the ability to live where they've already invested. So it's very encouraging. It is. But I do see the concerns, and I share the concerns with many of the residents you heard this evening.
Okay.
I think that's something that the Housing Commission, I think, has been so successful here in Arlington Heights, is to be able to balance successfully. They have for decades.
Okay.
So thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Trustee Hayes, then Trustee Breyer.
Well, I would concur with a lot of what Trustee Farwell said. I think there are some good ideas in here that the village could get behind. I do agree, though, with the residents' concern that there are a lot of generalities, and so I think it's incumbent upon the village board and the staff to really look at these on a recommendation by recommendation approach to see what might be worthwhile, as you say, for the village of Arlington Heights, and take it from there. So my question then is for staff in terms of where we go from here. I would concur that I don't think the board is ready at this time to accept the recommendations or adopt the recommendations. I think we have a lot of work left ahead of us in terms of evaluating them, but I just wonder what the staff's plan is in terms of going forward with this.
Trustee Hayes and board members, this evening we've already heard a number of insightful, I think, observations in regard to what was presented. Really, the next step, I believe, will be up to CMAP to work with what they hear in Arlington Heights. Because this is, while we're part of a region, they are attempting to make these recommendations a bit more specific per community. Certainly, Trustee Hayes' comment that we, as a staff, look at these and kind of flesh out what might be applicable for Arlington and perhaps what needs more specificity so that the board can evaluate it, that can be done. But I do think that once the dialogue ends this evening, CMAP goes back and works with what they heard. I think it's a credit to this community that we had 3 people come forward. Other communities have had very little dialogue at these presentations. I think the board has been very engaged. Trustee Farwell drew on his experience with the Housing Commission, and I think it's been a very good discussion this evening.
Just to follow up on that, Bill, then the staff is not going to be parsing these out individually and coming back to the board with any recommendations?
Not until CMAP comes up with a final report.
Okay.
So I think, while I understand why the Housing Commission did what they did, I mean, that's their program area, I think for the board to take action would be premature.
And just to be clear, none of your compatriots on the other boards, when we've given these sorts of presentations, they've sort of taken it under advisement, provide us with comments, and we use it to go back and make edits and changes based on what you tell us. So the idea would be that you would be similarly suited if you did not give us a specific endorsement. In fact, we're not even recommending or consider that that's something you're doing. This is informational, both for us to give you information, for you to give us feedback so we can make changes.
Trustee Breyer?
I see the involvement of what I'll call technocrats. Have you sought the counsel of people who do developments commercially as to the workability of these recommendations?
Yes, we also have, in coming up with these recommendations, we rely on things that other communities have done successfully, both here within the Chicagoland region and nationally.
I'm talking about like architects and developers, those sort of folks.
The overriding committee at CMOP that helps review recommendations is called the Housing Committee, and it does include a developer component, yes.
As I've had developers say to me, back when you folks came before us, and it was still nice and warm out, all of that. I had raised the question whether when you, even if you increase density, if you add affordable units, if that doesn't either, A, increase the cost to those who will buy the other units or live in them, or erode developer profitability and produce dire results. I've had some in the building community say that I was right on, and yet I don't see discussion of that. And I want to be sure that that's considered. I don't mean that as a heartless, lack of compassion person, but there is no such thing as getting something at a discount without somebody else paying for it. And in drafting recommendations, I would want to be sure that you've sought the advice and have the advice of those who do this for a living. And I've been told that doesn't always happen.
Okay.
So I hope that you take that into account. I see mention of a housing trust fund. How would that obtain its money?
We have not made any specific recommendations in terms of how the village would determine whether, if or how it would want to fund that.
So that's one of these generic things hanging out there with no specificity. Because I can see what the residents say, you know, and as well as some of my fellow board members, you know, a lot of these things look good on paper, but when the tire meets the road, we create expectations we really can't fund. I have no other questions. Okay.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Jonathan, question about rental units.
Sure.
They seem to be coming more in demand at a higher price these days, and Arlington Heights seems to be commanding one of the higher rates, and we currently have a large development going out on the west side that's looking for nothing but rental as far as, and they see a huge market in it.
Okay.
So how have you been able to deal with that from the standpoint of creating affordable rental units, and kind of relates to what Trustee Breyer said as to, you know, if you're reducing the rate on one, it's typically increasing the rates on others.
So one of the things that we should clarify here is that a lot of people have been using the term affordable in more of a generic way. We should make clear that when we talk about affordable in terms of this project, we're talking about it on a relative basis. So we're talking about it in terms of 30% of a person's income, not a bright line test of saying, you know, for a family of four making below $60,000 a year, that person is a lower or moderate income household or is an affordable household. We're not talking about anything like that. We're talking about, you know, there's affordable housing for people that make more than $150,000 a year, where the people are not spending more than 30% of their income on housing. So that's one thing that we should just clarify at the beginning, just so it's clear. When we talk about affordable housing in this document, in these recommendations, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about on a relative basis, ensuring that people who live in Arlington Heights, whatever their income level, are paying something that allows them housing certainty in the future, does not make them cost burdened now or in the future. So as it relates to that specific development, we have not looked at that in terms of rental rates or anything like that. I have not looked at those figures, so I can't determine or state whether or not that is or is not affordable in that sort of broad sense. Other than to say that when we think about projecting out in the future households who may live in Arlington Heights between now and 2040, or people who may want to live here in the future, that the projections themselves, the numbers that underpin it, are designed to look at and assume that a household is not paying more than 30% of their income on housing.
And then, to some degree, hasn't the market kind of driven the affordability, too, of housing, where we've seen, you know, condominiums, you know, reduce in price to probably less than what the builder built them these days?
Sure, there is definitely a market component, and when you look at the recommendations themselves, one of the reasons that you don't see a great deal of specificity, particularly as it relates to locations here, is that we're trying to provide policies that relate to the housing market operating here in Arlington Heights as a whole, rather than at specific locations or talking about specific developments in specific locations, other than to say and identify general areas that may make sense, like downtown, because there's already been existing opportunities there, or areas like along Algonquin Road because of other efforts that may be taking place in other communities or other previous planning efforts that may have focused on the area.
But, I mean, in our case, I think we've seen pricing in downtown Arlington Heights probably go up of recent because of the demand for it and proximity to transportation and things like that. So,
sure.
So the affordable component, so to say, is even more difficult to attain.
Yes, but there's obviously are ways that you can go about doing that. I believe the Housing Commission in its recommendations noted the possibility of using density bonuses and things like that that maybe have been used or tried here in the past. Those are opportunities, but we don't make specific recommendations in terms of whether or not those are things that the village should continue with in the future. We try and talk more generally about the housing market as a whole.
Thank you.
Trustee Farwell.
Just a couple, batting cleanup on a few things. I strongly concur with Trustee Rosenberg when it comes to the fact that it appears as though the market, especially in the affordable or the attainable condominium market, certainly took a huge hit in the housing collapse, and that is also the last area that has yet to stabilize.
Yeah.
It's still falling. We are not out of this. And how does that come into play as far as figuring out our projections of not having a running out of affordable housing by 2040? How did that, did that come into a factor in calculating those terms, and how was it in there?
Sure. So a good example would be what underpins a lot of it is U.S. Census data that gives us information about what people are earning in terms of income along with what they're paying in terms of housing costs. And so even if the value of those units have fallen, they may still be paying higher costs. The other example would be that as incomes fall as well, even if the housing prices are falling, if people's incomes are at the same rate or falling as well, then there's not as many people who can afford it. So that ends up being an issue, sort of a catch-22. Yes, housing prices are falling, but if you also have falling incomes or non-growing incomes, it may slowly allow more people to afford those units, but it's not quite the clear-cut boon that you might think it would be. So the way we tend to the way we try and go about incorporating that in is by using U.S. Census data combined with CMAP's Go to 2040 population and household projections. So we look at the supply of housing now in the village, and then we look at the future population in terms of the number of people that could move into the village in the future, the number of people who may want to live here in the future, and then look at exactly how they would be stratified out in terms of income level and compare.
All right. The reason why I'm asking is because I thought it was going to be the census data that you were going to be referring to, and I would caution using just a singular source of data to project such an important number.
Okay.
You might also want to take a look at the percentage of funding for these affordable housing, the affordable housing stock. I know in my own private practice we have several closings coming up in the coming weeks for condos in the CMAP area that I think would shock some of the people out there of how low these condos are going for. I mean, some you could buy a car that's more expensive than a normal car.
Sure.
That's more expensive than what some of these things are going for. So I get the whole ratio of attainability versus the cost, but you are almost at that $15,000 rate that, attainable for $15,000, $431 a month. You're almost there.
I think our only concern, and obviously that sounds like a great data source, and it'd be great to chat with you offline about exactly, specifically which data sources you have in mind. I guess our only concern would be, looking at it over a 30-year time period, it would be I don't know how reflective it would be to look only at a particularly low point in the market. Obviously, we're doing that right now. We're trying to also take into account the fact that, you know, as populations may grow, the economy will hopefully, for all of us, not be the same in 30 years as it is right now. So it's a fine balance, as you said.
Yeah, yeah, you'd want to take a running time frame and then just update that all the time. But, you know, you could use CoStar or MLS or anything along that lines to you know, figure that out. And also, just a very pointed question, I think you kind of answered, but I wanted to get it on record. Are you guys pinpointing areas in any of the areas in the CMAP area?
The only recommendations that contain specific geographic areas is a discussion generally about opportunities along Arlington Heights, or along Algonquin Road, and the area of downtown Arlington Heights, building on what you've already done. There are no recommendations that touch on Arlington Heights Road. There are no recommendations that make comments about what should or should not be built there.
Okay, because I have real issues with redlining and pinpointing specific areas, not only for Arlington Heights, but for our companions and neighbors that are on the same board. I don't think that's true, and you know, I don't think that's prudent. And the area that the residents have come out to talk about this evening, that was a focal point of June's meeting, is not in Arlington Heights downtown. So I am concerned that, and Algonquin Road has its share of attainable housing that is not rebounding nearly well enough. And I think, you know, maybe we should be looking at crime records as well to be careful where we are looking for new development and do it thoughtfully.
Okay. Yeah, and that's sort of the general goal of the recommendations, is to use the data, think about the housing market in Arlington Heights as a whole, and where there's opportunities, for example, along Algonquin Road, to use that data to think about it specifically and to pick your opportunities, not to make any general recommendations about any income levels or targeted groups that should be moving to those specific areas.
Okay. I'm sorry for taking so much time. It was just important points that I wanted to...
You'll pay for it later.
I know.
Trustee Blackwood.
One of the questions that I had as you look into the future, because a lot of discussion has been centered around condominiums. As you look into 2014, is there a period in time when the pendulum does tend to sway towards the needs of either more affordably priced rentals? And if I recall correctly, there were two areas that were very specific that were going to be in shortfall. Very expensive homes, and those probably that are over $500,000 to $1 million, and then the lesser priced homes. When does that start to evidence itself, even more so than today?
So we haven't broken it out by specific year between 2010 and 2040. Instead, what we have done is looked at the beginning point and the end point. So when you do look at those, when you're looking at 2040, there is gaps at the bottom and at the top end. Obviously, some of that is impacted by how the housing choices people make. There's been an increasing number of people between 2000 and 2010 paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs, and a lot of those people are probably individuals making less than $15,000 a year who are, you know, moving up, buying up in the market. And there's also people at the top end who because of their flexibility have the opportunity to move down. In other words, they can choose to purchase units that take up a lot less than 30% of their housing costs and save that money for other uses.
Again, going back to discussions about the condominiums, one of my big concerns throughout the village is foreclosures of single-family homes. And all of the concerns, whether it's with issues of folks that are not law-abiding citizens, so to speak, or just having empty properties within established neighborhoods, there's a great deal of concern about that. Has the collaborative or CMAP taken a look at what they want to do with single-family homes? In foreclosure, I should say.
Sure. We didn't spend a ton of time in Arlington Heights specific recommendations. If that's something that the village board wanted us to look in more detail, we can. I know that the collaborative has been already working to some degree on that issue in terms of some of the work that's been doing with banks and lenders in terms of working to, as you talked about, find opportunities to make sure people are navigating the foreclosure process as successfully as they possibly can and finding an outcome that works best both for them and for the banks. So there is work that the collaborative has already done on that in terms of trying to work as a group of 5 communities to talk with banks in terms of some of the larger banks like Bank of America would be an example, and to establish those relationships so that it can benefit people currently living in Arlington Heights.
I guess my only other question in that regard would be the question would be, do the other communities that are involved in this collaborative experience the same levels of foreclosures as, say, Arlington Heights has in the last few years? Because I don't think we've seen the bottom of that either.
A lot of the collaborative communities, and part of the reason that a collaborative made sense was because they share very similar housing markets and very similar housing conditions. So a lot of the foreclosure issues tend to be the same, particularly as it relates to, for most of the collaborative communities, that would be focused on condominium and townhome foreclosures as opposed to single-family foreclosures. But as anyone who lives on a block with a foreclosure can attest, it doesn't matter what the source of that is. It doesn't matter if it's a condominium or if it's a single-family home. It can cause problems for a neighborhood, and that's an issue.
Thank you.
Well, to try to wrap this up, I'm listening to all the tremendous comments, and thank you, coming from a banker, see here. You know, I think what you may have heard is I just think it's remarkable, and I want to say thank you to CMAP for the initiative, because given our shrinking staff as we have adjusted over the last 3+ years of trying to be lean, this study has given us a lot of data to not just let things happen, but try to have some method of predicting and be able to deter some of these things, because now we have knowledge and we can plan. But I think what you've heard tonight, not only from the trustees, but from our citizens, that we have a really huge, if you look at our land mass usage map, a lot of single-family neighborhoods who are quite well established. And we're 125 years as Arlington Heights, so many of these homes have been around a long time in the neighborhoods. And so I think the concern expressed is, you know, there is nothing targeted. We're looking at big picture planning, and the 5 communities are trying to work together to not each have a person looking at this, but one person who kind of sits over all 5 of us. But the work that CMAP has done in the study to be done for us, as specific of showing us all those charts that we had a few months ago, is very, very good for our Housing Commission and our housing staff. Nora does the work of 3 people because that's all we have right now. And so having the collaborative work together has been a great source of information and data for our staff and our Housing Commission to work with. And I think citizen input, the continued, you don't know how valuable you were by coming tonight. I appreciate it. Because the worst thing is misinformation. And I think, I'm thinking as I'm hearing all these comments, I remember the first apartment that I lived in out of school and first married, and how we had to move and travel, and it was a while before you could afford to buy a home, and the prices of homes and how we thought it was a lot then, but what we'd like to see it at now. But not the way we got to our lower prices. The foreclosure is not the best way. But to protect the sense of neighborhoods, but still have affordability. There was a slogan, and I'm not sure I'm going to get this right, but we need the people that need this housing in our communities. We need the workforce, and I think the loss of employment has had a big impact on our challenges in the housing market right now. And that's why the foreclosures are so bad. People have lost those good paying jobs because companies have gone out of business. And it's all interconnected. But I thank you. Any other comments from staff? I certainly thank all of you, and I don't know if you expected this much dialogue, but you can see our
We
trustees are engaged.
We appreciate all the dialogue and all the comments.
Great. Keep up the good work, and we're looking forward to seeing how this all rolls out, because I think each of the 5 communities, they have similarities, but they have uniqueness.
Okay, all right, great.
Trustee Breyer?
I'll be brief, if that's possible with me. But I've had architects say to me that one of the impediments to making things affordable is building code requirements that they think are excessive. Are you planning to look at any of that?
We haven't made those recommendations or thought about those areas specifically. If that's something that the village board thought it is an area that they believe we should explore, we certainly can.
Well, how do you know if you don't look?
Well, in other words, that we haven't looked yet, and if you feel that it would be appropriate for us to look, we will.
I think it would be, from, I can't speak for everybody else, but from my perspective, it's appropriate, as well as just see more input from that sector of the building community that has the knowledge that we as lay people don't. Sometimes when you do it, it's a lot different than just talking about it.
Mm-hmm.
The subject of codes did come up at one of our meetings that we held here, and how pretty much they're similar in the 5 communities, but there was some specific differences because of the different types of housing. So, Mr. Dixon, you wanted to
That was the point I was going to make as well.
Okay. Because it was a very engaging, I think it was in our community room. It was a good meeting, and there was Mayor Wilkes had a lot of unique codes in Mount Prospect, for example, that she brought up for multiple housing that I don't know that Arlington had.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Jonathan, and I bet you didn't know we were going to keep you up so long.
That's quite all right. Thank you.
Thank you, and again, thank you for everyone who participated in. And this is obviously was an informative. We're deferring any action until we get the final recommendations that'll be forthcoming from this tremendous challenge of the 5 communities trying to come up with the similarities and the differences of the 5 communities. So thank you all. Any other closing comments from staff on this? Okay. That concludes item B, the report of the housing issue. So we move to item 10, approval of bids. Mr. Dixon.
Thank you. As we all know, on June 23rd, 2011, the village was subjected to a record-breaking storm, rain event. 2 types of areas in the community had problems. One is the combined sewer tributary area, as well as 7 locations in our separate sewered areas. We believe the first step is to investigate the problem areas within the separate sewered areas while waiting for flow monitoring results for the combined sewer tributary area. Incidentally, we attempted to get flow monitoring data on the combined sewer area this past summer, well, spring and summer, and consistent with one of Murphy's laws, after embarking on an effort, we experienced a drought. So this evening, until we can get better data on the combined areas, we are asking the board to consider a recommendation to retain a consultant for trouble spots in the separate sewered areas. 4 proposals were received for this engagement. They were reviewed and evaluated without knowledge of the bid amount. It turned out that after that review took place, Christopher Burke Engineering ranked at the top of the ratings for all of the critical items. They have substantial experience on almost identical projects in Buffalo Grove, Winnetka, and Des Plaines. When we opened the envelopes on the cost estimate, theirs was second lowest out of 4. We believe that Christopher Burke represents the best value and demonstrated the most thorough understanding of this engagement. This was further substantiated through interviews on 2 occasions with them. And this evening we're asking the board to approve a contract for professional engineering services with Christopher Burke. This is a budgeted item. The total cost is expected to be $59,894.
Trustee Breyer?
I was out this weekend doing what people do when they're up for re-election, and I had a number of my neighbors asked about what we're doing after that rainfall. And this is obviously something that is hopefully a positive action for our residents. And more than any, there are some things that are really the responsibility of a municipality, and others that are only nice if you can afford them. And in my mind, this is something that we really have to do. And I'm prepared at this time to move acceptance of the proposal that's before us.
Second.
A motion by Trustee Breyer, seconded by Trustee Hayes. Any other comments? Trustee Rosenberg.
Bill or Scott, whoever wants to answer this. So are these the only 7 areas that we determined? Or are these the major items, or were there others?
These are the 7 areas, Trustee Rosenberg, that are in the separate sewered areas. The bulk of our problems were in the combined sewer area, which consisted mostly of sewer backups, and that is a much larger study and undertaking that we're in the process of analyzing the flow monitoring data, meeting with engineers, and plan to move forward at some point once we decide exactly how we have to structure that study. But this is the 7 areas where we have had reoccurring problems, not just on July 23rd, in lesser events on about a 2 or 3 year frequency in the separate sewer areas. So they were kind of seen as distinct and separate from those in the combined sewer area that are a little bit different characteristics of those problems.
So this pretty much covers then all the other, all the areas that in your mind are in question as far as in the separate sewer area?
Correct. The only caveat I would make is that the Cypress area, which has been studied already and we have some recommended improvements, is also in a separate sewer area. So as we discussed at the Committee of the Whole meeting, once recommendations come out of this study, once recommendations come out of a study for the combined sewer area, then there would be, quote unquote, a menu of improvements and estimated costs, and the board would be in a position at that time to decide whether or not we can come up with some funding mechanisms to move forward on any of those improvements.
Do you foresee these being treated separately as far as from the standpoint of, these 7 areas being treated at a different time than maybe the combined sewer areas?
I think what we discussed in principle at the Committee of the Whole was that the recommendations on these separate areas, these 7 separate areas, will be ready before we have recommendations for the combined sewer area. And this is really a board decision, but I think we talked at that time just to say that it probably wouldn't be appropriate to proceed with improvements in these areas before we first saw what was necessary to mitigate the problems in the combined sewer area, so that we could look at everything together and decide, and not give one problem area more import than another. And when I said that at the Committee of the Whole, I didn't hear any negative feedback or disagreement. So at this point, that's kind of the way I was still planning on proceeding, and staff was still planning on proceeding, was to get this work underway, but wait to make recommendations on improvements and possible funding mechanisms once we have the information for all the problem areas, which include the combined sewer areas. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess the only caveat I would say is, depending on the time frame that we end up, if we end up getting delayed on the other one too long, we may want to look to potentially start this as long as it's within a reasonable time. So.
Well, certainly we would not delay the release of this report in favor or waiting for the other study to be completed. So there could be a juncture where this information is ready, the report is provided, there's a menu of recommended improvements along with cost estimates, and at that time, the board could decide to move ahead. I don't think that could be ruled out.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? We have a motion and a second. Anyone in the audience wish to speak on this issue? Any other comments from staff? Roll call.
Trustee Breyer?
Yes.
Trustee Hayes?
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg?
Yes.
Trustee Sidor?
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood?
Yes.
Trustee Farwell?
Yes.
President Mulder?
Yes. Motion carries. We now move to page 3. If you are following along on our agenda, I have the consent agenda, which are all the items contained on page 4. And I would ask if there are any trustees who wish to vote no or pass on any item of the, that are contained on page 4. Does any trustee wish to remove an item for discussion? Are there any citizens in the audience that wish to remove any item on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we have a motion?
Move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
A motion by Trustee Hayes, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg for approval of the items on the consent agenda. Roll call.
Trustee Hayes?
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg?
Yes.
Trustee Sidor?
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood?
Yes.
Trustee Breyer?
Yes.
Trustee Farwell?
Yes.
President Mulder?
Yes. Motion carries. We now move to page 5, new business. We have a Pure Juice Cafe petition, and I'd call in Mr. Dixon.
This is at 24 South Evergreen Avenue in Evergreen Plaza. Special use to allow for a sit-down carry-out restaurant. This was considered by the Plan Commission on October 10 and recommended for approval unanimously with conditions. Those conditions are stated on the agenda.
If the petitioner would please come to the podium. If you could identify yourself.
Paulina Kadzilowska, 103 South Wigo Trail, Mount Prospect.
Greg Wojtowicz, 103 South Wigo in Mount Prospect.
You agreed to the conditions that were forthcoming in the recommendation from the Plan Commission?
Yes.
Any other questions? Trustee Rosenberg.
Charles, question regarding employee parking. Is there any kind of condition that we are putting on the petitioner as far as where they will have their employees park?
Trustee Rosenberg, in many of the restaurants downtown, we have added a condition that they require permits to park in one of the public parking garages. In this particular center, they have their own parking. And so the restaurants in this center, Fausto's and the Populicious, we have not required that because they typically park in the parking lot there. But they can purchase permits to park in the Vale Garage or any of the other lots where we have spaces available.
Well, certainly for employees, that's probably wise because there is limited parking. I'm sure it's the owner of that shopping area, but I was wondering about the exercise, the yoga place. You know, people are there for quite some time. This is quick in, quick out. I noticed that the Populicious has some 15-minute parking. I don't know if you've requested to have something like that in front of your storefront.
We didn't look at that.
Actually, this shopping mall doesn't have any assigned parking spots, so there was their choice to put those signs. But you know, people who want to park there and use other businesses, there's no restrictions. There was just, you know, so we can. I mean, as far as you know, choosing different spots, or people can park anywhere. So.
Well, maybe all the people will come and have something to drink after they finish yoga. Trustee Hayes?
No questions.
Go
ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So do you plan on having employees?
About 2 to begin with, and then maybe a total of up to 5 within the first year. But to be considered fully staffed, we would have 2 to 3 people. We will be a family-owned business, so we'll be there too. So that includes us. as well.
Right, I guess my only thought is that, you know, there's only, I think, 50-some spaces in the center, and if you have anywhere from 3 to 5 people working at your place, potentially there could be 3 to 5 cars parking in those spots too. So, you know, you may want to, even though it's not being required here, you may want to give consideration in the future as far as to monitor that, because you may be taking.
For sure, we don't want to, you know, take up the spaces of prospective clients.
Right.
So if that would be an issue, if there would be a time frame where that would, you know, benefit us and the businesses around us, we definitely would look into that.
Right. So, I mean, it's not being made a condition here for approval, but it's something that you as business people would keep in mind as far as, obviously not, because obviously if somebody doesn't see an empty space there, they're not going to stop and they're going to go on.
Of course.
So that would be just my recommendation to you, so.
Thank you.
Trustee Hayes?
No questions, just a comment. I just wanted to thank you for choosing Arlington Heights to open your family-owned small business. I think we sorely need entrepreneurs such as yourself coming to the village to fill some of our vacant storefronts, and so we certainly appreciate your willingness to come to Arlington Heights, and we're very glad that you've chosen our downtown area as opposed to some other downtown area, and we wish you the best of success in the future here in town. So I would move approval.
Second.
Thank you.
Motion by Trustee Hayes, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. Any other questions or comments? Any other comments from staff? Roll call.
Trustee Hayes?
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg?
Yes.
Trustee Sidor?
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood?
Yes.
Trustee Breyer?
Yes.
Trustee Farwell?
Yes.
President Mulder?
Yes. Thank you. Motion carries. Good luck, best of luck. When do you think you will be opening?
Springtime.
Spring.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank
good.
you.
Thank you very much.
Good luck and welcome. We now move to item B on page 6, St. Dominic's Daycare. Is a petitioner present? If they could please come forward and identify themselves. Mr. Dixon, opening comments?
This property is at 1000 West Northwest Highway. It's a special use to allow a daycare in a kind of a hybrid zoning district. There are a number of parcels that are zoned differently. The Plan Commission reviewed this on October 10, held a public hearing, and recommended approval unanimously with conditions. Those conditions are on the agenda.
Thank you. If you could identify yourself for the record.
Good evening. My name is Greg Szaszko.
And I'm Ela Szeszko.
You wouldn't be Polish, would you? Yeah. Polish Daycare Center, where it would be bilingual, which is a very interesting concept. I would ask the trustees for your questions. I just, you know, playground noise, I think your hours are pretty much, everybody picks up their children by 6?
That's we're open until 6, but they typically start picking up anytime after 3 and then 4 until 5. That's typically when most of the kids are gone, and the kids are not typically outside around 6 anyway.
I drove the site over the weekend, and there's basically one home that's close. I don't know if you plan for any buffering.
We plan on having fencing and then landscaping and greenery, both around the fence separating the properties and also around the playground fencing itself.
Trustee Rosenberg?
So to continue on my parking reign here. Charles, again, 18 employees, 37 spaces. Again, we don't see an issue with that.
Trustee Rosenberg, we took a look at the parking situation, and the petitioner provided data from their main prospect location, and actually provided the actual logs of when the parents, picked up their students, and we, worked with the petitioner. They extrapolated that for the capacity, and even based on full occupancy at 127 students, it showed the peak parking occupancy in the morning at 34, and they have 37 spaces on site. So, for a daycare, it actually has quite a fair amount of parking. Many of the daycares that we have in town have significantly less than this. So we're pretty comfortable with that. Most parents don't spend that long, at the facility. It's, usually a few minutes, sometimes maybe 5 or 10 minutes. Occasionally they may have a, evening activity, like a show for the parents, and that would be a situation where you could get some parking on the adjacent street, and that happens in other daycares, but that's very, maybe a Christmas show, Easter show, or something of that nature, or some other religious function that they may hold. So we don't see that being a major problem.
On Kennecott itself, is there parking allowed on both sides?
I believe immediately adjacent to the building there's no parking allowed, but further north there would be.
So, I don't know, do you have a drawing like this that you can put up?
I think just those in the audience, this is the former home of Plas business, the building and a relatively large parking lot.
So you're saying then where that 742 house starts, or, I don't know, maybe the 647 on the right side, parking would begin from that point north?
Approximately. I'm not sure exactly where it starts, but right in front of the building, you're in kind of this area down, there's no parking.
Right.
And it's somewhere along here, whether it's at this point or a little further, is where parking is allowed.
So to the petitioner, you feel if you're going to have 18 employees that all park in the parking lot, so that obviously only allows, is there 37, space 34?
Be 19.
Yeah, 19 spaces, is that, you feel that's sufficient for the
We do feel
number of
comfortable
cars at peak time?
Yes, we do feel comfortable with that number. Not all of the employees arrive all at the same time. They typically, the staffing level builds up as the number of children arrive in the facility, and then as the children leave, the staff leaves as well. So I think that sort of allows the majority of employees to be on site, where vast majority of kids have either been already dropped off or start being picked up. We do feel comfortable with those numbers, yes.
Okay, because what typically happens sometimes when there's an overflow and people start parking on the streets, they would be going north on Kennecott there, that we start getting complaints from residents of that. So just if you would keep that in mind and keep an eye on that.
We've been we've been cooperating with our neighbors in our present location, where we have even smaller number of parking spaces, and we have had no complaints from anybody around about that.
Great, thank you. Good luck.
Any other comments, Trustee Breyer?
I think this is an excellent reuse of a building that was vacated by a business that's gone. And I wholeheartedly endorse this. Are you still going to have your other facility?
Yes.
Yes.
And continuing the first thought, since I do believe this is an excellent reuse of the building, I move that we accept this proposal as well.
Second.
A motion by Trustee Breyer, seconded by Trustee Farwell for concurrence with the Plan Commission recommendation of approval. Any other comments?
I just have a question, if I might.
Trustee Blackwood.
I was looking at the landscape plans, and I saw that to the west you have I think it's the children, the toddlers to 2 years, the playground is to the west, and then you have the playground north, the 3 to 6 year olds. Could you just give me an idea what's in each one of those playgrounds? For example, like merry-go-round, slides, swings for the 3 to 6 year olds potentially, or maybe I'm just presuming that.
I don't plan any swings like that. The majority equipment would be like something like huge sandbags, anything that's going to be on the ground. We do not plan to have swings.
Okay, so
they're typically climbing structures and age-appropriate structures.
Older children?
For both. The height of the structures and the platforms differs depending on the age. That's why needs to be a separation of playgrounds by child's age.
Okay, so how tall would some of these be? I mean, they certainly would be, well, I'm not going to presume, the structures for climbing. For the older children, for example,
I don't recall
halfway
specific
up
numbers.
the building?
No, but I think the height limit is 36 inches off of ground, or
3 feet.
specific
I
numbers.
do not remember at this time.
We do work
don't.
with companies, and we do have structure in our present facility that when we design those things, they have to meet all the DCFS and state regulations. And I apologize, I don't recall specific height limits. I believe it's 24 inches for the highest platform for maybe the smallest kids, and I think it's either 36 or 48 inches for the maximum platform height for the older children. Then, of course, the structure is a little bit taller, where it provides a little bit of a roof over some area, and our existing structure is in the form of a train engine, so it has a platform and then a little tube where the kids kind of slide through and slide down, so that the top of the structure is taller, but the bottom platform is very strictly regulated.
Okay. I was just concerned about the safety issues and what type of activities were going to be planned there, but thank you, you've answered the
We're
question.
very much concerned with safety in the playground ourselves. Yes.
Okay, any other comments from trustees? Anyone in the audience? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second. Roll call.
Trustee Breyer.
Yes.
Trustee Farwell.
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood.
Yes.
Trustee Hayes.
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Yes.
Trustee Sidor.
Yes.
President Mulder.
Yes. Motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now move on to page 8,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Village of Arlington Heights thoroughfare. Mr. Dixon.
The final item under new business this evening is an amendment to the village's comprehensive plan adopting the thoroughfare and transportation policy plan. We have had a thoroughfare and transportation policy plan for many years. This is an update. It's been reviewed by the Plan Commission. That occurred on October 10. Public hearing was held, and the Plan Commission unanimously recommended approval. In this case, there were no conditions.
It's well done. Looks very time-consuming. Somebody spent a lot of time on it. Charles, you're smiling. Any questions for staff in regards to the thorough plan? Trustee Hayes?
Just to comment that I was on the comprehensive plan subcommittee that met prior to the Plan Commission meeting on this, and we had a number of questions at that level. I think the Plan Commission was satisfied with the questions that the subcommittee had asked. So I think, as I said that evening, I think it's very well done and very much needed in terms of updating what had been done some 25 years ago, or it's a long time ago. 1987 was the last time it was looked at.
Nothing wrong with what happened 20.
Right. But it sorely needed to update it, and so I think it's a job well done, and we've been using it over the course of those years in a number of decisions that we've made at the board level. So this is just a real good tool to continue to use. So it's definitely a worthwhile effort, and I would move approval.
A motion by Trustee Hayes?
Second.
Second by Trustee Rosenberg to approve the amendment to the Village Comprehensive Plan, which adopts the Thoroughfare and Transportation Policy Plan. Any other comments? Anyone in the audience? Looks like only press in the audience. Roll call.
Trustee Hayes.
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Yes.
Trustee Breyer.
Yes.
Trustee Farwell.
Yes.
Trustee Sidor.
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood.
Yes.
President Mulder.
Yes. Motion passes as it did unanimously by the Plan Commission as well. Seeing that there is nothing under legal or appointments or petitions, we go to the report of the village manager.
Said
Trustee Farwell.
one thing on communications. Just wanted to report out about our Northwest Municipal Conference and how we took a stance on the referendum that's on the ballot for tomorrow. So I thought I would just read their releases since we are members of the
that'd be
Northwest.
fine.
I'm sorry, I didn't tell you I was going to do that, so I apologize. Tomorrow there will be a statewide referendum on our ballot, which will ask if we support an amendment to the Illinois Constitution requiring a supermajority vote of the General Assembly to approve any future pension benefit increases. The Northwest Municipal Conference, of which Arlington Heights is a member, is a regional council of government representing 42 municipalities and about 1.3 million people. The referendum, called referendum number 49, proposes to amend section 5.1 of Article 13 of the Illinois Constitution so that no bill that provides a benefit increase under any pension or retirement system of the state or any unit of local government or school district shall become law without concurrence of 3/5 of the members of that elected body and the General Assembly. For too many years, previous General Assemblies and governors have repeatedly approved pension benefit increases with virtually no regard for the fiscal impact these sweeteners would have upon local taxpayers. These pension sweeteners have contributed to the exponential increase in taxpayer contributions in the pension systems, resulting in higher taxes, greatly reduced public services, including public safety and long-term instability of the very pensions in which that were enhanced. So the Northwest Municipal Conference, of which Arlington Heights is a member, has taken a stance on this particular referendum to please vote in favor of that referendum, as we believe it would be economically prudent to do so for our village and for our fellow members of the conference, as well as the state of Illinois. Thank you.
And just in case anybody doesn't know, tomorrow is Election Day, and I just want to commend all those who worked for the last 2 weeks on early voting. Mr. Dixon, I don't remember how many thousands of people came through Village Hall to vote. Do you have any idea? Maybe the clerk?
12,876.
I know some people spent more than an hour in line, but felt that was better than trying to vote on Tuesday. I think the staff is to be commended for accommodating that. I know we had to be here opening the building for the judges and so forth. Mr. Dixon, you have some comments?
Just one comment, and that is a tribute to this building and to the board that supported the construction of this building. We never could have handled that crowd in the old Village Hall.
Mm-hmm. We couldn't have handled the parking either. We had the parking garage, but I think the parking across the street, and then I think a lot of people probably parked elsewhere. It was convenient, but people were lined up, and looked like it was busy in front of the finance department. So people wanting to come in and purchase leaf stickers and things had to kind of go around all the people, but they were very patient. No one got upset, and it was a good facility. I think it's a good point. So if you haven't voted, this is only going to be good. It's going to be too late when you hear this next week when we replay our meetings, but it is a presidential election, and people do come out for that. So I hope the lines don't discourage yourself because of a long line. Here it was 22 machines. They were really moving you through. Kudos to those who organized that and did help through the democratic process. So it was quite good. No other comments? Mr. Dixon.
This evening we're asking the board to hold a closed session per 5 ILCS 120/2C21, discussion of minutes lawfully closed, and 5 ILCS 120/2C5, purchase or lease of real property. It's not expected that the board will be reporting out any actionable items tonight.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to go into closed session made by Trustee Hayes, seconded by Trustee Rosenberg. Roll call.
Trustee Hayes.
Yes.
Trustee Rosenberg.
Yes.
Trustee Farwell.
Yes.
Trustee Sidor.
Yes.
Trustee Blackwood.
Yes.
Trustee Breyer.
Yes.
President Mulder.
Yes. Thank you all for joining us this evening. This concludes our open session. We will now adjourn into closed session. Thank you again for joining us.